Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Katie Deming, and this is the Born to Heal podcast, where we explore holistic practices for cancer prevention and healing. Let's welcome Dr. Maureen McMichael, board certified veterinarian in emergency and critical care and professor of 20 years, formerly at Texas A&M and now at Auburn University. Welcome, Dr. McMichael. So nice to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
So, you know that I'm fascinated with fasting in humans, but I also understand that there are benefits for fasting animals. Can you tell us?
Sure. Oh, goodness. So, animals will naturally fast when they're sick. And it's really interesting. There's not a lot of research on fasting in healthy animals. There's one paper where they looked at a 48-hour fast. And they really were looking at leptin levels and a couple of other ghrelin levels. And they found some benefits to the 48-hour fast, but they were healthy animals. So it's kind of harder to deal with in terms of the data. But, sick animals will fast for days, 5 days, 6 days. And there's a belief, I think, all across human and veterinary medicine that we have to feed them. If they're not eating, we have to shove tubes in them and push food. And I don't think that's true. I think intuitively they know what they need. And the best thing they can do probably is fast when they're sick. And I'll just tell you the nuance here. There was a paper that looked at animals that were sick and which ones were fed early and which ones were fed late, meaning three to 5 days after they got to the hospital, they were fed, or they were fed immediately. And the ones that were fed immediately did better. But when you look back at the details of that paper, it was because they voluntarily ate. They did better because they came in with an appetite. Well, we all know that means they're probably feeling good, as opposed to the ones that had no appetite for 5 days and then were given artificial nutrition. So it's very interesting how some of the research, if you look back at it, probably does support fasting.
Interesting. I love that.
Some of the research that is very robust in veterinary medicine is time-restricted eating or caloric restriction. And so in 2002, there was a paper that they took a number of litters of dogs as newborns, and separated them and randomized them. So one group got normal kibble and the other group got 25% less. Same food, same breeds, same litters, everything. And they followed these, it was 48 labs. And 48 labs. And they followed them for an entire life, like their entire lifespan. And they died natural deaths, they lived in homes. And the ones that had the 25% caloric restriction lived over 2 years longer. They had significant decreases in the ailments of age. So osteoarthritis, heart disease, all of that. They were healthier, so they had a better health span. And that was followed in 2016 by another paper. And should give people hope. It was 39 Labradors that were started at 6 years of age. So they didn't start any intervention until 6 years of age. At that point, they cut their feeding by 25%. Those that had their feeding cut by 25% lived significantly longer. 28% of them reached what we would call geriatric, or over 15.6 years of age. That in a Labrador, that's really old. And so we do have good evidence for caloric restriction. And that does not include anything else in terms of health, right? There's nothing else included in that, just kibble and decreasing the kibble. So I think a combination of decreased caloric intake, which I believe is achieved through fasting, ideally, it's a win-win.
I love that. Tell us who you are. Like, how are you, authoritative in this area to speak about animals and their health specifically?
Yeah, so I did the traditional route. I grew up in New York City, And I'd always wanted to be a vet, but it didn't seem to be in the cards for me because I had a single mom. We were pretty poor. And I ended up going to a local community college, but I really wanted to be a vet. And so I asked the community college how I could do this. And he said, you can't. You can't from here. You're not getting in. The New York State College of Veterinary Medicine is Cornell University. He said, you'll never get into Cornell from here. So he said, your only chance would be to go to Columbia University. And so I went to Columbia. Columbia has a fabulous program for non-traditional students where they'll pretty much take you it's easy to get in, it's hard to stay in, say that. So then I got to Cornell, I did the traditional training, and I really fell in love with emergency medicine. And so after that, I did an internship and then a 3-year residency in emergency critical care. And after that, I went for my first faculty position at Texas A&M. And that is where I started to fall in love with working dogs. And the whole idea of working dogs is you don't have fancy equipment. You're in the middle of the woods and there's an emergency and you've got to figure out what you're going to do. And so I started really getting interested in that. And so I worked with some of the handlers and I started, and then I moved to the University of Illinois. I was there 13 years and we did a lot of work with the police and the EMTs and all of the working dogs. And I really got interested in that. And then I started getting interested in the nutrition of these dogs because these are high working dogs there. And nutritionally, they really have some pretty significant needs. And then I came to Auburn, and Auburn has a pretty significant working dog area of research. And so I also became interested there. And probably somewhere when I was in Illinois, I started fasting. And that's when I really saw the benefits. I absolutely love fasting. I think there's so much. And of course, the Nobel Prize in 2016 went to the person who discovered autophagy. So it's obviously a thing. Yeah.
I didn't realize that actually, that your history is really in working dogs. And that makes sense about the nutrition of working dogs is so important because they're working. And when people are focused on the outcome of how animals are performing, you're going to have really big interest on nutritionally what they're eating. So I love that. And I know personally, your interest in fasting, and that's kind of, we connected through Tom Cowan's clinic and the New Biology Clinic. But what I loved was a lot of the things that I was learning to be true for humans. You were like, hey, that's the same. It's in the same in the animals. And so I was like, I got to have you on the podcast because people need to know this information too. Obviously, all of my episodes up until this point have all been about human health, but our animals, and I'm surrounded by them. I've got my ragdoll kitty Goose sitting there and my 2 Labradoodles on the floor behind me, and their health is so important. And I think that as people are waking up to maybe the false information and poor nutrients that we have been consuming as humans, are also realizing, oh, wow, the food that my animals are eating is also important. And what do I do for them? So I love that you started out with talking about this calorie restriction, that we're feeding them too much probably. And that, there is something there in terms of doing less. But I'm wondering, I've discovered one tool that has completely transformed how my clients heal, resetting their metabolism, activating the body's natural healing, and giving them incredible mental clarity. That tool is water fasting, and you can access my free workshop all about fasting as a healing modality right now. I cover how fasting actually works in your body, the different types of fasts, and how to know which approach is right for you. And most importantly, I cover how to do it safely. Whether you're navigating health challenges, have tried fasting before, or are completely new to it, this workshop is for you. I'll share real success stories from my practice and give you the framework I use with my clients. You can watch it now by accessing the link in this episode's description. This workshop could change how you think about healing entirely. Can you tell us, so let's talk about dogs specifically. What should we be feeding our dogs? And then how, if we did want to incorporate fasting and also thinking about less calories, how do you think about that? How would you approach feeding a healthy dog? And then we can talk about when dogs are sick, and you already described that they don't want to eat and this is what they naturally do. But let's just talk with healthy dogs. What should people be doing for their dogs?
So the first thing is there is no time in nature that a dog or cat would be nibbling all day, right? I mean, a cat doesn't catch a mouse and take a nibble and leave it there and then 10 minutes later take another nibble. Not in no time in nature would they be nibbling all day. So that's the first thing. And somehow it started, I think in veterinary medicine, people would feed their animals usually once a day. And then it spread to twice a day. And then it spread to free food, free ad lib, leave the food around all the time. And I think that's a mistake. I think it's really a mistake. And people worry about not leaving the food all the time because they say he or she doesn't eat breakfast well. That's because it's around all the time, right? So there's a catch-22 there. So the first thing, don't feed all day. That's the first thing. That's pretty simple. The second thing is, at the very least, what a person can do simply would be to feed one meal a day, at least 2 to 3 times a week. And that's a 24-hour fast. So it's pretty easy to just say 2 to 3 times a week, I'm just going to feed one meal a day instead of 2. And then that gives me a 24-hour fast. And from that point, it could be extended a bit. So it could be extended to a 26-hour fast. We're just feeding dinner an hour later. Then, so it's easy to play with that. And I mean, you are way more the expert than me, but I think there's some evidence that 17 hours is where we start to begin the autophagy around that time. So I like to aim for at least 24 hours, 2 to 3 times a week. But if we could get a little bit more than that, I think that could be ideal. I have someone whose dog had a pretty large tumor, visible large, and voluntarily fasted, just did not want any food. And so she started feeding her dog just raw milk. That was it. And the dog would drink raw milk. And after a month, she was worried that this wouldn't be nutritional. It still wouldn't eat any food. So she added a raw egg and honey to it. The dog ate nothing but that for 6 months. And at the end of the 6 months, the dog was 15 when she started. At the end of the 6 months, the tumor is gone. The dog was young again, felt fabulous, and is now 18 and a half.
Wow.
No, I'm not recommending people do that. The dog did it. The dog did it. So she didn't do it. The dog did it. But it's just amazing what I think fasting can do. I think it can be really powerful. And I know people, so here's a challenge. People say, but she comes to me with big eyes, wagging her tail, begging for breakfast, right? Like I know that. So, Walter Longo says that as long as you're under 400 calories and you don't have any protein, you're not breaking the fast. So I recommend a carrot or a sweet red pepper. Most dogs will love sweet red peppers. So something like that, where we don't have protein and it's a very low caloric density, that just to get you over that hump of, that I'm missing breakfast.
Yeah. I'm thinking about, I have one who just does fine. And I have another one who knows like to the minute when he is supposed to be fed, and he will start sneezing and the whining and the shaking his rear end to say, mom, 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 so I love that. And my dogs love bell peppers. Like if they hear you start to cut bell peppers, they will immediately come in there. So I think that is great. And so you just give them just a couple pieces to kind of get that feeling like they've eaten something, and then kind of just lengthen the time period. And let me also be clear that we're talking about dogs specifically with the once doing a 24-hour fast 2 to 3 times a week. you're not talking about cats with that. We're specifically talking about dogs.
Right, right. Specifically dogs. Cats are a little bit different. Still, I don't believe cats should be eating all day.
Yeah.
They shouldn't have the food out. The difference with cats is that if a cat is overweight, and a lot of cats that are on commercial cat food, which is very high in carbs, a lot of those cats are overweight because they're not meant to have carbs. Cats are carnivores. So if the cat is overweight and we fast them, now it's usually doesn't start until 3 days of not eating. They will mobilize too much fat and it will go to the liver and they'll get a fatty liver disease, the fatty liver. And so they shut down their liver. So it can be dangerous to fast a fat cat or a cat that's overweight. So cats are a little tricky. Again, I don't think they should have food all day. And depending on whether they're indoor or outdoor, if a cat is an indoor outdoor, they're getting food all day. Anyway, I mean, they're getting mice and, they're catching little things. So, but generally in the wild, cats only eat at night. They don't eat all day. They sleep most of the day. They hunt at night. They eat at night. So they're more used to the restricted time for feeding. And there's a fair amount of biology on the circadian rhythm and eating with your own circadian rhythm, which would mean a nocturnal animal should eat at night. So if I were to feed a cat one meal a day, I would feed them dinner. That would or feed them at night, whatever that means for them. Yeah. So dogs, it's mostly dogs.
Okay, perfect. No, and that's helpful just because I think, I was talking about both my animals but I did ask you this question specifically about dogs. So I wanted people to hear that about the cats part. But, it's interesting too, since, we scheduled this and before we had the conversation today, I had a conversation with another colleague who's a naturopath actually, and she had a golden retriever that was and it was service retrievers. So I grew up having guide dogs for the blind. So we had breeders and I don't remember them doing this, but she described that actually with this breeder who bred specifically retriever service dogs, they always fasted those dogs at least once a week for 24 hours. And they've been doing that for like 20 years. Wow. And she said that they have a very long lifespan for golden retrievers. And so she had known about that for a really long time. She's like, oh yeah, don't you fast your dog? And I was like, no, I didn't know that. And she's like, oh yeah, when I got mine from the breeder, they told us that they do this I think it was every Sunday they fasted the dogs. So interesting just because it makes sense.
It makes sense. Yeah.
But, we're just so used to like, oh, we want to feed them all the time. And then also, with the animals, I feel like they can't talk to us. So when they're, whining, it's like you think, oh gosh, I'm hurting them. I don't want to I don't want to deny them. But the truth is we're actually more likely to overfeed our animals and harm them in that way. And doing less is, like you said, with the 25% caloric deficit, that just even reducing the amount that we're feeding them is a good thing. So really flipping the way that we think about this. I think just like with humans, we have been told that feeding an illness, like chicken soup when you're sick and that kind of thing, that's not what our ancestors did. This is a recent thing that we had switched to. So now we're unlearning that not only for ourselves, but also for the animals.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And in the wild, if you think about it, so it sounds interesting because, there's a million diets out there for pets, right? There's a carnivore diet and there's the mono diet. And there are a lot of people that think they should just have meat. But if you think about it in the wild, if a dog got, well, not that a sheep is wild, but let's say a dog got a sheep, right? Or a coyote gets a deer, the first thing they eat is the intestines. And if you count the stomach, the small intestine, and the large intestine, that is a good chunk of that animal, probably 30% of the edible part. That is filled with fermented veg because that animal has been eating grass and it's in the microbiome, the bacteria breaking it up, and we have fermented veg. So and there is some evidence that dogs need 30% fiber. So I think that when it comes to the ideal diet, adding in fermented veg is really important. And I find that dogs tend to take very well to sweet fermented veg, beets and carrots. That seems to be the easiest to get them to eat. Less likely you're going to get them to eat cabbage, like sauerkraut. But beets are sweet, carrots are sweet, and most dogs really love those.
Oh, that's super helpful. And then do you do kefir? Like, do you give them kefir as well?
Yes. And it feels, it feels like having a child when you have these grains that you have to keep alive. It's like sourdough. And so you've got these grains, and I'm in warm weather. So it's pretty warm here, which means I have to change it every day. So sometimes it gets a little overwhelming, and I just put it in the fridge for a couple of weeks just to put it to sleep temporarily. And then I wake it up and I do it again. But yeah. When I make kefir, I give it to my dogs and my chickens.
Oh, interesting. The chickens too. Yeah, no, it's funny. The kefir, we just had a call in my fasting group with Monica, and someone was having trouble with their kefir grains, and it can be hard to get them started, right? But then like once they're going, it's like, wow, what to do with them. So giving them to the animals, doing the kefir as well to the animals. And can they do some of the grains? Like, because sometimes,
They love the grain.
Yeah, you end up having so many grains that using them is helpful as well. So I love that. And then what kind of food do you feed your dogs?
So this is interesting. There's commercial, and then there's raw, and then there's cooked. And then there's keto, which is interesting. So, and I'll just mention this, there's a website called Keto Pet, and it has tons of testimonials of cancer in dogs that has been reversed with the keto diet. And what I like about that website is it gives people tons of recipes for homemade. This is how you make it. This is, so that's kind of nice. So Chinese medicine says that we should have our food warm. And in babies, if you feed them cold food, they'll vomit it up. Like they can't handle food that's not warm. So there's a part of me that feels like that it probably should be warm, particularly in the winter months. And so going back to nature, right? In the winter, in the summer, this might sound disgusting, but in the summer, wolves would catch something, eat the intestines, eat the organs, and bury the muscle and the bone. And then over time, they would dig it up and eat a little, dig it up and eat a little, and it essentially ferments. Now, they can't do that in the winter. So I've been thinking about this. What do they do in the winter? In the winter, they have less, right? They have less exposure to food, but it's always going to be warm because it's a fresh kill. So in the animal, they're eating body temperature food, essentially. So I think that maybe the warmth in the winter is something that we remember somehow. So I have an older dog so if you feed raw, it's always going to be cold because it's got to go from freezer to fridge. And then, so I always make a big pot of Monica's chicken soup. So I have chicken stock and, I'll have everything in there. And then that's hot. And the broth goes on the wet, cold food. Oh. And that helps warm it up. And so that's my older dog really likes that. The others will eat anything I give them. Anything.
Yeah.
And then, so there's homemade cooked, there's raw. Raw should be sourced from a really trusted place, ideally local. The ideal, I have one person that I work with who's lives and runs an organic farm they have every kind of animal you can imagine. They butcher their own animals on the farm and feed those fresh to their dogs. So that's like, it doesn't get better than that. Yeah, most people can't do that. But then there's commercial. And one of the issues that it came out a while ago, but then in 2020, we have some evidence that the heat processing of the kibble can cause damage to the vitamins. So there's new foods out that are coming out left and right that are air dried and freeze dried. Some of those are high quality. So there's one that uses 85% New Zealand beef and human grade New Zealand beef, and then it's air dried. And then the other ingredients are like pumpkin and some vitamins. So some people have to have that because so I use it when I'm gone and I have a pet sitter because she's just not going to cook for my pets. So I use that for those times. And some people have to have that. Some people are too busy to cook. But at the very least, a simple thing would be to take a bowl of that and crack a good pasture-raised raw egg. Or grab, I get frozen chicken livers, frozen chicken hearts, thaw those out, throw a chicken liver on top, something like that. That's easy sort of as an add-on, and it's convenient because you just grab it and throw it.
I love the idea of putting the chicken stock over their food because I've been giving my dogs will eat anything too. So and this is actually a question. So we had been making food and that I had farmer's dog at one point. And then we switched to making the food and we found out that one of my dogs had skin issues with the chicken. And so we were doing different types of meats, but it's amazing at how expensive that can get with doing the meat. And so one of the questions I had for you is like something like farmer's dog that is, it's vegetables and meat that's mixed and then packaged. What are your thoughts about those types of foods?
Those are, I think farmer's dog is transforming the veterinary field because they have a significant presence and they have hired veterinary nutritionists. So they're really working hard to make it a really good homemade food. And I think they're great. I won't ever think that anything, I always think homemade's best.
Yeah.
But the next best thing would be that.
Yeah.
Really.
I think it was just surprising for me because I was thinking, oh, well, it should be like cost the same, but it's just more time to cook it yourself. But actually, it was a lot more expensive than farmer's dog. And really, because you have to be cooking every couple days, it was really time intensive. So just to be honest, we've gone back to the farmer's dog just because it was working. The dogs liked it. But I think what I'm going to do, just like you said, is add the chicken stock to it and then doing the kefir, which we have. So that adding those both. And also, so I didn't know that you could add a raw egg to dogs and they do fine with that.
Yeah. As long as it's trusted, a trusted source. The other thing that is a really nice thing, especially for cats, but dogs too, sardines in water. Because a sardine is a whole fish. Like the little organs, it's got a little liver, and so and if you can get it, it's hard to get, but if you can get it with the eyes, with the head, that's fabulous. Most people can't, most of them have the head removed, but sardines are great, not in oil. The oil's always rancid, but in water, they are fabulous. You can keep them in the cabinet, just grab a can, throw a sardine on top, and it's fantastic.
Okay, well, I have sardines too. So there we go. I love it. You just gave me several ideas. So it's really helpful. One thing that I know we don't have a lot of time, but I wanted to just touch on with you because I have known this to be true through my practice and then I've heard you mention it. But so I've had clients where they have cancer. And then lo and behold, the dog has cancer of the same kind. And I'm just wondering, like, one of the things that you've talked about when we were in the new biology clinic together, you would say oftentimes the animals' illnesses will mirror what's going on with the humans. And I'm wondering if you can just speak briefly to that. I would love to know more.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And so there are a couple of studies in veterinary medicine looking at the placebo effect. And this will make sense in a minute. So the studies that are the most robust are the epilepsy trials. And so what they did was they took dogs that had had a diagnosis of idiopathic epilepsy, so no known cause, who had to have had at least 4 seizures a month for over a year. So pretty regular seizure activity. They brought them in. Half of the dogs got a placebo, and half of the dogs got a new exciting anti-seizure medication. Nobody knew which got which. The owners didn't know. Of course, the dogs didn't know. And after the trial was done, over 50% of it's over 80% of the dogs in the placebo groups had reduction in seizure frequency. Most of them at least a 50% reduction. So the dog is getting the placebo and his seizures are cut in half. So how on earth is that happening? And it's because they are absolutely reading the owner's feelings, perceptions, emotions. And that owner is, I would imagine, is saying, this might be a really exciting medication that's going to stop the seizures. And it's a good thing. And the dog sees it as a good thing, and the dog feels better. And so there's a very strong connection with the owner and the dog and the owner and the cat. Very strong. And I think people underestimate that. And one of the things that when we're worried about them and we, in a panic, look for test after test and keep going and getting another test and come back, I think that gives them the element of fear is inserted into the relationship. And that fear can never be good. It can never be good. And so the more that people can make that connection, and then of course the fear in the person who has cancer themselves and is so afraid, that fear is just, I think it's sort of magnetizing to the pet and the owner, and it's just going back and forth. And so anything people can do, I tell people the best time to talk to your pet is when you're petting them. So you're petting them and you're telling them your body is brilliant. It knows exactly what to do. It knows exactly how to heal. It's brilliant. And the more they say that, and it's probably coming into their mind too, right? But it's really powerful. And they've shown cat purring can have some significant effects on humans, right? Just the vibration of the cat purring and you're petting it, it's just beautiful.
Animals are especially dogs, are so intuitive. And when the human is upset, then they come and they basically come and share. My perception is that I think that they're sharing their frequency, right? They hold a high frequency. They're living in the present moment. They aren't, plagued by fear and anxiety and all these things that we hold most of the time as humans. And them just coming and sitting on us is healing, right? And so it makes sense then that if they can share their frequency with us of peace and well-being that can affect us, that our frequency of the anxiety, the fear, all of that can affect the animal. So, and I love those studies. I love the placebo effect because it shows there is really something there, and it makes so much sense, right? And it makes sense that there are studies that show that the placebo effects when the doctor thinks that the patient is getting a medication, so the doctor's belief affects the person who's taking it. So it absolutely makes sense that animals would be influenced by their owner, what they believe, because that's who they look to for their care and safety and authority. So I think it's fascinating, and I think there's so much still for us to learn there. But I love that you see that, when you said that you saw that too, I was like, oh, there's definitely something there, because I know it, I see in my practice. And also sometimes I've seen where animals are doing fine, and then the human gets sick with cancer or something, and then the animal gets sick and dies. And you wonder too, I mean, and who knows, I'm not trying to make people feel guilty about their dogs dying but who knows if the dog took on something to help serve the human. There's so many questions that I have, I think more questions than answers, but it fascinates me.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think it is powerful. There's a dog that was on Ignatia. Ignatia is a homeopathic remedy for grief and loss. And this dog had been a rescue dog, and he had been in multiple homes and then sort of dumped and abandoned. So he was put on Ignatia, did so much better on Ignatia. And the owner went to a human homeopath, and her remedy was Ignatia, which just totally separate. Didn't know that human homeopath, didn't know anything about her dog, but that was her remedy. So it's very interesting. It's almost like they're helping us go through these portals of transformation that we need to go through. And they're there to help us go through them. It's just beautiful. And, Kelly Brogan said once that she thinks they are representing our inner children that need to be healed, which is very interesting too.
Yeah. I can see that. See that. Well, thank you so much, Maureen, for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm sure I would love to have you back to talk about other topics. Yeah. Where can people find you?
The only place right now is New Biology Clinic. I don't know anything about social media.
I love that.
Yeah, I don't like it. I don't do it. Nothing. But New Biology Clinic, yeah.
Okay, great. And so for those who don't know, the New Biology Clinic is a multidisciplinary clinic now, actually founded by Tom Cowan, and that they do holistic care, and it's membership based, and they have a veterinarian. Now they have dentists too, multiple dentists joining the practice as well. So we'll put a link there to the New Biology Clinic. So Maureen, thank you so much for being here. It was my absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. It was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here today. Please enjoy a previous episode of Born to Heal. And if you found value in our conversation, please subscribe and share with someone who might benefit. Have questions? Drop them in the YouTube comments or message me on Instagram. Links are in the episode description. Remember, just like me, you were born to heal.